welcome to part 10 of our chat app series. If you've made it this far, congrats. This is about halfway through, and we're going to get pretty into it in terms of starting conversations and messages in this and the upcoming videos. So that said, let's jump right into it. So we're going to open up our XC workspace to begin. And in this video, what I wanted to do is be able to allow the user to search for other users and set it up where they can start a conversation. And we'll see how we do on time, and we might even dip our toes into sending a message. So this whole process entails changing up our database schema a little bit, and we're also going to look at how we're going to load the user's profile picture here when we search for them, so we can get some really nice looking avatars and all that good stuff. So get started by just running your app in your simulator. I like to start by deleting it just so we get a fresh state. And while this guy's building over here, it looks like we have a warning. We can ignore this over here. It's actually an error. Why are we getting an error? Hopefully this goes away. Sometimes Xcode just decides to not do its job properly. Can't find the Facebook login SDK. So let that run for a second here, and we'll see if it gives us an error what we got to do. But go to your Firebase console, and let's go to our database, and let's talk about the schema. So let's go here. So right now, what we have essentially done is every time a new user is registered, we create a key, which is their safe email address, and that points to a object in which they have a first name and a last name. And we're not pointing to any, rather we're not saving their profile picture name in here. And the reason is in our storage bucket, if we go back to this, if we recall, the naming convention that we picked under images is pretty standardized. It's the safe email address with the suffix and PNG at the end. So there's no really reason that we need to save it in here since our app can essentially hard code it. But going back to the database, I don't know why it makes me click this every time. I should just know we're using the real time. But anyways, the challenge about now allowing the user to search for users is Firebase requires that you provide a child node to get the data back for. But all of our child nodes themselves are users. So because this is a NoSQL database, what we want to do is create a users node where we essentially have objects that have the email, name within them. So we're going to do it so that makes more sense. In a relational database, this whole setup would be different. But since this is NoSQL, we need another users collection. And this is very, very specific to NoSQL databases, and this is something that people struggle with about NoSQL databases. So this compiles over here, Xcode, like I mentioned, which is being dumb. We're going to log in to our account for Joe Smith. So I'm going to say joe@gmail.com. I think that's what we called it. And I think this was password. There we go. We have logged in. So now we're logged into Joe's account, and here we just had our table view showing a random cell for the sake of setting this up. So let me actually do a few more things before we get into searching for users. So once we log in to the account here, if we go to the login view controller, one thing that might be useful for us to do is cache the user first name, last name, and email to user defaults. That way we can just have it on the device if we ever want to show it somewhere. So in the login view controller, in the function that calls all the Firebase functions, so this one right here that does the validation once login button is pressed, we basically grab the email and password here. We never, ever, ever want to save the password, but we want to save the email in this case. So go ahead and let's see, in this function, we basically try to sign the user in, we do a guard let, and we dismiss the spinner. We make sure that the result is not optional, error is nil, and then we sign the user in and dismiss the navigation controller. So before we dismiss it, what we can go ahead and do here is save the user's email address. So I'm going to say user defaults standard, And we are going to set the email variable, which again is up here that the user typed in, and we're going to set it to the key of email. And you'll see in a few minutes why we're saving this now. Now also, we're going to copy this and do the same thing for Google sign-in and Facebook. So at the bottom of this class, we have where we create our Facebook request to get data from Facebook. So do this same thing here, because we have email from our Facebook fetch result here. So we save that email there. And finally, the Google sign-in is handled in app delegate. So go there. And in this Google sign-in monstrosity of a function, we can save their email. And again, the email is right here. We grab it off of the Google user's profile. So go ahead and paste that user default right there. So the reason we are saving the user's email now is because we know that the storage bucket has a standardized format for their image. We can actually just use the email to query out the image for the user. And we want to show their user on their profile tab. So this tab is fairly empty, this one right here, and it's been kind of bugging me. So let's add in their image, a circular avatar for the current logged in user, just so we can more easily see who the heck is logged in. So now that we've saved it here on each login attempt, we want to go to our database manager. And again, Command-Shift-O to get the search window. Here we have the, not really algorithm, kind of the search and replace, or rather the way we're creating this safe email, this here actually. So let's grab this and let's make it a reusable function. So right now it's a part of this chat app user, but what we're gonna do is in this database manager class, we're gonna create an extension. Actually, we'll just do it here. We'll create a static func and say safe email, and we're gonna pass in an email and return the safe email variant. And this is essentially going to take this email, let's just call it email address since that's what we called it below, and it'll do the string replace to return the safe variant of it. The reason we want safe is our images in the storage bucket use the safe email as the file name. I believe it's safe email, and then we do underscore profile underscore picture dot png. So now what we can do is on our profile view controller, if you recall, on here we basically just have a table view. We're going to create a function that says that is called create table header, and this will return a UI view, and we're going to say table view dot table view header. I believe it's table header view. Okay, and this is going to now equal our create table view header, and in here we are going to say let view equals a UI view. And let's actually make this return optional, because if we don't have that user email saved, we don't want to create a header for the table to show the avatar. So let's first get that email out. So we're going to say email is user defaults standard, and we want the value for key email, which is what we saved it to, as a string. Otherwise, we are going to return nil rather. And if we do have an email, we want to get the safe email, which is database manager.safe email. Notice there was a static function, so we can call it directly and pass in that email variable. And then we want to get the file name, which is this safe email. And then I believe it's underscore profile picture.png. Let me double check that over here. So we did the safe email address underscore profile underscore picture.png. So looking good. We want to import over here Firebase storage. Actually, no, we don't. I just lied. So we don't want to use Firebase storage because we have our storage manager, which will handle the fetch for us. We're going to create a function there to make sure we keep things modular. So we're going to say the directory structure that we want to get. So path is going to be images plus the file name. So this is the thing that we want to get, and then we're going to create on the storage manager a function to return the download URL for this asset in the bucket. So let's actually create this little view thing here. So we have a view, which is a UI view. We're going to want to return it, and let's give this a frame. It'll be a CG rect, XY width and height. Let me put these on new lines. X is going to be 0, Y is 0, width is self.view.width, and let's say height is 300. We can leave the background color. Let's actually change the background color. Let's make it like a light blue so it looks somewhat nice. And then in here, we're going to put a image view. We're going to say an image view is an image view. It's going to have a frame, again, pass in a CG rect with an X, Y, width, and height. And let me control I to fix the indentation here. And it looks like we need to fill this in before it fixes itself. So the Y, so we're going to make the width and height rather 150 by 150. The Y is going to be, we want it to be centered vertically. So the height here is 300. 300 minus the 150 over 2 gives us 75, if I did my math correctly. And the X is going to be the view.width minus the size, which is 150 over 2. And let me try control-I-ing this again. It should fix the indentation. Let's add it to our view. And let me actually rename this to be header view. It's not really great practice to use these arbitrary names, and I don't want to set that precedent. So let's do that. Also, that view variable name collides with the view controller's view. And what more do we want to do? We're going to say the content mode on this, that's what I was looking for, is scale aspect fill. We're also going to set a border, and the border color will be UI color.white.cg color. We're also going to set a border width, and this is going to be 3. And finally, we're going to set in here the fact that this layer will mask to bounds, and that will be true. So go ahead and hit Command R to build and run. And let me actually fix what we broke here. This should be the image view right here, and it's because I spelt it wrong. Thought the autocomplete wasn't cooperating. And this should be on the image view, not the header view. Let me move this to the bottom once we've set up all the aspects of the image view. Let's fix that indentation with Control-I, and go ahead and hit Command R to build and run. So you should see now, and we can ignore this for a few seconds. So you should see now on this tab, we should have a header view up here, but it looks like we don't. So that's interesting. And the reason we don't is because it's returning nil here because we added the notion of saving the email after. So let's log out and log back in. So once we've logged out, let's log in with Joe again. And password, hit login. Let's come back here and notice it's still an issue. And the reason is because this view controller was already initialized. So open it up, and here is our header view with our avatar. It's just a circle right now, and it's a little large, so we're going to fix that later on. Now let's actually set the background color of this to be white, and let's update our storage manager to be able to fetch the download URL. So let's go to the storage manager, and in here, if you recall, we have this function right now, which is upload profile picture. We want to create a general function which is going to return the download URL based on a path that we give it. So we're going to say public func download URL for path, which will be a string, and this is going to provide a escaping completion handler, and the completion handler will give us a result value back with a string, or optionally an error, rather in the failure case an error, and this whole completion closure will return void. Open up your curly braces to create your body implementation of the function. And in here, we want to say reference, which is the reference to the path we're giving is storage.child. And we're going to pass in path. And if you recall, storage is just an internal private reference to the Firebase storage object. And now we can say reference dot download URL, and this returns a URL and a error. Both are optional, so we're going to say guardlet URL equals URL and error equals nil, else we can return. And if we hit an error, we want to call our parameter completion with failure, and we're going to basically pass in this, and this is going to be failed to get download URL. Otherwise, we can call completion again and pass in success. And if you see up here, we've said that this completion handler returns a string. Let's update this to be a URL. It's more indicative of kind of what it is, and the call site most likely needs a URL to come back. Not sure why this is complaining at escaping completion. This looks good to me. Let's take a look at that error in a second. But let's pass in this URL to this success block. So go ahead and hit Command B, and it'll yell about this error here. So let's look at this error. So this is saying attributes only apply to types, not declarations. And the reason it's saying that is because this at escaping goes after the parameter label. So we're saying this whole closure is escaping. And if you're not familiar, this escaping just signifies that when you call the completion in here, it can escape this asynchronous execution block that Firebase provides. So go ahead and hit Command B. Should be compiling now. So now we can go back to that profile view controller again. And in here, we can use this path to fetch the download URL. So notice the workflow is first we give it a path, we get the URL, then we're gonna have to use that download URL to download the image itself. So we go through a few hoops, I guess. So we're gonna say storage manager shared, and we want the download URL for a path. Completion's gonna have a result, so we're gonna say results in. And then in here, we can switch on the result, and we can say case success gives us a URL, failure gives us an error. For the error, we'll say failed to get download URL and put in the error in our print. And for the success case, we now have the URL, so we now want to download the image itself. So what I'm going to do is create another function in here just to keep things a little modular. And we're going to say download image, and we're going to pass in image view as well as a URL. And in here, we can say self dot download image, and the image view is the image view up above that we created, and the reason we're passing it in is that's where we want to assign the image once it has successfully downloaded. And there we're going to pass in the URL. Now this is self dot, so we need to do weak self so we don't cause a retain cycle for memory. So do weak self there. The self should now be optional. And in here, we now need to download that image, so we can say URL session shared data task, and we want data task with a URL. Pass in that URL. The completion will hand us back data. The second parameter is URL response, which we don't care about. In this case, we'll leave underscore. And the third one is an error. And the data and error are both optional. So we're going to say guard let data equals data, error equals nil, else we can return. Otherwise, we want to convert the data into an image as follows. And finally, we want to assign to that image view its image property to be data. And let's spell image correctly. Sorry, to be not data, we want to assign it to be the image as follows. The last thing I'll do is we're going to wrap both of these onto the main thread call, because anything UI related should occur on the main thread. I'm not going to get too into the weeds of concurrency in this video, but just make sure you wrap it onto this. And don't forget to put .resume here to actually kick off the operation like so. Whoops, let me Control I to fix indentation. So I know it was a little fast and it was a lot. I'll revisit it in a few minutes, but let's just make sure it works first. So go ahead and hit Command R. When we go to this tab, we should first be fetching our reference from Firebase, which will give us back our actual URL for the image, and then we'll subsequently download it, and we in fact show it here. And the one thing I forgot to do is make this a circle. So circular avatars just look nicer. So we want to say on the image view, the layer, and we want to set the corner radius to be the image view's width over 2, and that will give us a rounded circular image view. So go back to that tab again. We've got a circle, and there is our awesome looking avatar. So this is Joe's avatar. It's not, it should be like a person, but oh well, too late. So now let's actually talk about starting a conversation and the schema stuff that I was mentioning here relating to our database. So basically, we want to be able to get all the users in one request from Firebase, and we need one root child node to do that. So whenever we register a user, we not only want to create their entry like this, but we want to have another user's collection and be able to put the user in there so we can later query it. So what that means is we now need to actually go ahead and update our database manager. And we added a function, if you recall, in here called create user, I think, or insert user. And what we want to do in this insert user is once the user object is created initially, we also want to append it to our users collection. So before we call the completion here, what we want to do is first try to get a reference to an existing users array. If it doesn't exist, we're going to create it. If it does, we're going to append to it. So let's see how we can do that. So to get any reference from the database or any value for it, we can say self.database. The child we care about is users, and we're going to say observe, I believe, single value, or observe single event rather, and the type is value, and providing sibling key. I don't think we need that. Let's try that again. We want to observe a single event, and we want the one with the completion with database snapshot. This is the one we want. So we want to observe a single value, and this will be snapshot in, and the snapshot is not the value itself. So now what we're going to say in here is guard, rather if let, we're going to say if var actually, if var users collection is snapshot.value as an array of dictionaries. Then we can continue in here, and now in here what we want to do is append to user dictionary. Otherwise, we want to create that dictionary, or array rather. And let me actually put in comments here what I've got mentally thought out for this users array. I think it'll help to have a visual. So we're gonna want a users array, and in here we're gonna have multiple entries for each user, and that's gonna hold their name and their safe email. And every time we add a user, we're gonna create a new one of these entries. And I hate how it doesn't fix the tabs on its own. And basically this whole array will have one root child pointer called users. And the reason we're doing this again is when the user tries to start a conversation, we can pull out all these users with one request. It saves you database costs, and it's pretty clean to do as well. So let me actually leave this here instead of deleting it. So the first user that gets created, it can't come in here because this users collection won't exist. And let me make this actually string, and we can leave it string actually, because we know that the name and the safe email will be the string. If it doesn't exist, we want to create it. So the way we're going to create it is we're going to say let new collection is going to be an array, and it's going to have string colon string in it. So here is our array, and the first key is going to be name, and the name is going to be the current user being inserted. So we've got user dot first name and last name. We're going to make it one string. So we're going to say user dot first name with a space plus user dot last name. And then we also want their email. So we're going to say email is user, and it's going to be safe email. So this is the thing we want to add to Firebase for that user's reference. So now in here, what we can say is take this whole thing, and we can say this, and we want to set a value, and the value will be this new collection, like so. And once we've called this new collection set, let me actually also add a completion handler to this like we did above. Once this is done, we can actually call this bottom completion here, because when we're inserting a user, we're essentially not done until we've also taken care of updating that collection. So we similarly had a completion handler here, and it has an error and another value in it. So I'm going to put that here as well, like so. And we're just going to say guard error is nil, else return. Go ahead and move the root completion call in here. And let me zoom out and make sure you guys can see this whole thing, because there's quite a bit of code now that's going on in here. Let me move this out to the bottom. So basically, once we insert a new user, we make the root entry, and then we make sure it didn't fail, nothing went wrong with this completion. Then what we want to do is we want to add it to our array of users, which has just this name, which is both the first and last, and the email. We're going to check first if that collection exists. If it does, we can append. If it doesn't, we need to create it. So this would only occur for the very first user that signs up. Now in this case, let's take care of appending. And we're going to call the completion once that append is done also, because this completion for the whole function is not done until both of these operations succeed. So in here, to append, basically we're going to say users collection, and we want to append a new element. And this new element will be the same thing that we're adding here in the array. So we're going to say new element is this. And again, what we can do is we want to overwrite what's in that user's position. So we can actually copy this whole shebang down here, place it here, fix that indentation with a Control-I, and let's review what we just copied and pasted. So basically, again, we call self.database.child for users. We want to set the value, and we're going to pass in this collection we pulled out initially. and we have a completion on it once again. Make sure an error didn't occur, and then call completion true if it succeeds. And the reason we're doing if var, this is very similar to if let. It unwraps the optional for value, but the var makes it mutable, and we want it to be mutable so we can append more contents into that array, and then we update it. And the other thing we should probably do is if this fails, we should probably call completion false in this failure, as well as down here. So sadly, we now need to go delete our users again in Firebase and take a look at adding them again. And I clearly spelled something wrong in here. So completion true. Let's see what the problem is in here. So this is saying use of unresolved identifier completion because I clearly cannot spell anything today. So let's get rid of this secondary M, as well as down here. Hit Command B to make sure things are running, or rather building. Go to your simulator, and we're going to reset the simulator because we're going to create new users, and I want to get rid of the cache. Now we want to go back to Firebase and clear out our database. So hover over this and hit the X for each of these entries. I'm not sure if there's a way we can just purge the whole database with one click. I don't think there is for security's sake. But go ahead and delete those. We also now want to go to our Firebase storage and delete this whole images directory. So check that box and hit delete. Go ahead and confirm. Give it a few seconds, shouldn't take too long. And lastly, go to authentication and get rid of these 3 users. So we're gonna hit the little 3 dots and hit remove for all of them. And I believe this will be the last thing we actually need to do in terms of tweaking registration. So you won't have to do this exercise of deleting anymore, hopefully. So this is reset, so go ahead and hit Command R, and let's register Joe again. Let's see what happens. So our app launches, we're on the login, we can hit register. We can hit this to choose a photo. We're gonna select choose. Here is our photo picker. Let's pick this and crop out the top here. There is our photo. And we're going to say Joe Smith, joe@gmail.com, and password. And go ahead and hit this button. We get our spinner, and it looks like we registered fairly quickly there. Our image should have been uploaded as well. So if we go to this tab, you'll notice we actually don't have our header here, and that's related to some refresh logic we'll fix later on. But over here, if we refresh this, we should have our user in here now. Things should have succeeded since it dismissed. Before we look at the database, let's confirm that our storage bucket has our image, which it does. In the database, now we should have a Joe entry from the root and a users array. So here is our entry that looks like the same as before, but more interesting is now we have this users root node, and it has another node because it itself is an array with a name and the safe email. So now we're in business. Let me get rid of my antivirus pop-up. Now we're in business to actually search for users. So I'm gonna pause the video real fast and register here with my Facebook account because we're gonna look at searching for users and we need another user here. So I'll be back in 2 seconds. All right, so I just signed in with my Facebook account. So I went ahead and created that user entry here at the root for another user, as well as put one into our collection here with my safe email and first name, last name. And we also, as you can see, have the image coming in. So enough of that, let's actually search for users to create a new conversation. So if you recall, we added this new conversation controller and we set up a search bar in here. And when you press it, the keyboard pops up. So let's go to that controller because that's where we will search for new users. So new conversation. So I keep saying new users, and what I mean by that, to clarify, is we're going to search for a user to begin a conversation with. So essentially what we want to do is we're going to type in a user's name, and we're going to hit search once we've typed something in, and we should see a spinner and then show users that match that prefix of what has been typed in. We're not going to worry about real-time search in this video. Let's get this functional. We can improve it moving forward. So there is a function we stubbed out here for the search bar, and this gets invoked once the search button is clicked, as the name implies. So what we are going to do in here is grab the text from the search bar. So we're going to say guard let text equals search bar dot text, and I think it's optional. And then we also want to make sure that the text is not empty. And then we can continue, otherwise we can return else, else we can return. And the other thing I like to do is I say text replacing occurrences of white spaces, any spaces with basically nothing, and make sure that isn't empty. Because if the user just presses a space, the space bar, and hits enter, there's no alphanumeric characters in there. So there's a couple ways you can write a regex to make sure this validation is correct. This is the simplest form, so I like to add this as a little precaution. So once we have some text the user is searching for, what I'm going to do is create another function that we're going to pass it to called search users. And this is going to take in our query, which is a string, and it's not going to return anything, but it's going to rather search the users and update our table view. So we're going to say self.search users and pass in that text. So searching users, how do we do that? So the simple answer is, well, we can just query Firebase for all the users, and then we can filter out the users based on the name. But that's not super efficient, because every time the user searches, we're going to have to read from Firebase again, and A, it gets expensive, and B, it's absolutely terrible for sake of loading and latency. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an array on here, and that array is going to hold user objects. It's going to hold rather the collection for these users that we put into Firebase here. And the first time we search, if it's not in the array, we'll pull it from Firebase. And the second time, it'll already be there, so we won't have to read it from Firebase again. We can just do the searching locally. And of course, when we hit search, we want to start showing the spinner. So we have the spinner that we already created here, which is this JG progress heads-up display. I'm going to initialize it with a dark style. And once the search button is clicked, I'm going to say this spinner.show in view, and this view is a view controller's view. Here we want to basically check if array has Firebase results. If it does, filter. If not, fetch, then filter. And then finally, update the UI. So either show results or show no results label. And I think we already added a table view and a no results label. So here's our table view, and we also have our no results label. And I think they're both hidden by default, which looks good to me. So let's create a variable on here now, which is where our Firebase results will go the first time we fetch. So we're gonna say users, and this is essentially going to be the same thing that we have in the Firebase remote. So it's going to be an array of dictionaries with a string key and a string value, and we're going to initialize it to be empty by default. So what we can do here is also what we can do, rather should do, is create a private var called has fetched and set this to false. So you might be thinking we could just check if this array is empty, which will signify if the fetch has completed. The edge case of that is if your app only has one user, this is going to be empty because we're going to filter out the current searching user. So you always want to check in another way if the fetch has been performed. So now down here, let's actually fulfill this workflow that we wrote out. So check if the array has the Firebase results. So if has fetched, we can do this stuff. Otherwise, we can do this stuff. And let's actually write the fetch function in the storage manager, or the database manager. Too many managers. So go to the database manager, and in here, we're going to write a function. It'll be a public func, and we're going to call it get all users, and it'll have a completion handler, which is going to be, again, escaping, and the parameter it's going to send back is a results with a array of those dictionaries. Otherwise, it'll hand an error back, and this whole thing will return void. So because we know that this is the format that it's in the database, we can just put it here for the results, an array of dictionaries. So in here, we're going to say database, and the child, we know it's called user, so we can just pass in users, so long as you spell it correctly. We want to observe single event for the value with the completion handler, and I always hit enter on the wrong one, so we want this top one here. We're going to observe the value. This is going to be snapshot in, and on this snapshot we can say guard let value is snapshot.value as an array of these dictionaries. If it doesn't fulfill that, we're going to return and pass in a completion block with a failure, and the error we're going to pass in, I think, is already defined in here. Maybe not, actually. Looks like we don't have any errors in here, so we're going to have to create our own custom errors. So leave that empty for now. If we pass the guard, we can simply pass in success and the value, which will hand back all of our users. Let's create our own custom errors here. So we're going to create a public enum called database errors, or just error singular, conform to the error protocol, and let's put a case in here, failed to fetch. And we can now pass in here for the failure database error dot fail to fetch. And that should suffice what we need to do in here for the database manager. So hit Command B to make sure it's compiling, and head back to the new conversation view controller. Now we can, because we know in this case we have not fetched yet, because is fetched will be false by default, we can say database manager shared get all users, which will have a completion with a result in. Make sure you put a weak self here because we'll need to reference self to save those results. And we can switch on the results to say switch results. For the case of success, we have our users collection, and we can say self question mark dot users equals users collection. Otherwise, there's a failure with an error, and I would print out failed to get users and append that error in there. And let's see, what else do we want to do? So now that we have the users, we can essentially take the user's initial search term and filter out the users that we want to show in the table view based on what they have typed in. So let's actually create a function to do that, because that operation will have to occur in this if block and the else, and we would probably end up copy and pasting code. So let's create a function, and we can basically pass in the term there. So let's say filter users with term, and we're going to say guard. We're going to make sure at this point that the users have been fetched. So we're going to say guard has fetched, else return. And before we fill that out, because now it has been fetched, here we can simply call filter users and pass in the term. And in this case, we can say self.filter users, and again, pass in the term, which is the query parameter. So let's move this comment down here because that's essentially what we're implementing. So now we want to filter the users, and if there's any results, we want to update the UI with either the table view results or the no results label. So, and not to worry, I'm going to zoom out and go over all of this once more once we're kind of wrapping up so we can get a bird's eye view of everything that we've done, since we've done quite a bit actually. So now that it's fetched, we are going to create another array, which is going to be mutable, called results. And this is again going to be an array of dictionaries. Whoops. String colon string. And we're going to say for user in self.users. Actually, instead of doing a for loop, we can be a little more functional about this. And we can say this. Let's see if we can do it the cool way. We can say self.users.filter. And in here, we can say name equals $0 dot, and because we know $0 is actually the entry in here, we can actually say guard let name equals $0 name as string, else return false. Let's change the spelling of this to be correct. And we also want to lowercase this. And the reason we want to lowercase is because search is case sensitive. So under the hood, we want to make sure that both the thing we're searching and our query are both lowercase. They could both be uppercase too, so long as they match. That's the key takeaway. And we're going to say basically return now if the name has prefix of term lowercase. So if the name begins with what we're typing, so if we're searching for someone's name like Johnny, if we type in J-O, we should get all the users that have those characters as a prefix of their whole name. And this will assign it to the results array here. And it looks like we've got a couple warnings. So hit Command B. So it's first complaining we're not using results, and then here it's complaining that we're trying to lowercase, and we don't need the as string because it already knows it's going to be a string. So you can just drop that as string, and the second warning should go away. You'll still have one here, I believe, that'll pop up in 2 seconds that we're not using results. But after this, we can essentially say self.results equals results. And we don't have a result on self yet, so it'll complain. The other thing we want to do is once the search button is clicked, we are going to first say, after the guard, results.remove all, I think is the function name. And results, you want to go to the very top here and create basically you can actually copy and paste it, a similar array, and call it results, and this is going to hold the result that will be shown in the table view. So go down here, make sure things are compiling. The reason we're doing a remove all is because every time a new search is done, we want to remove the results. And now that we have these results here, we assign them, and we can make this a constant, and we assign them to results. We can call a function called update UI, and we're going to create that function right below. And in this function, based on if there are results, we'll show them in the table, otherwise we'll show the no results. So pretty simple. If results is empty, self.noResultsLabel.is hidden is false, which will show it, and self.TableView.is hidden will be true. Otherwise, we want to do the opposite. So the no results will be hidden, so true. This will be false. And we also want to call reload data on this table view so we can refresh its data based on results. Now, because we just added results, we're not using it in the table view implementation. So come up here where we set up some of the basic table view stuff. And I guess, did we even set it up? I don't even think we did actually. So we actually need to set up the table view implementation. So we have the table view here. right here, and we register a basic cell for it. So let's actually, I think we add it as a subview, if I'm not mistaken. Do we? I don't even think we added as a subview. Okay, so we haven't actually even done that. So even better. So we're gonna first start by saying view add subview, the no results label as well as the table view. And let's see, right now we're only adding these two, which is perfect. We're also going to set the table views. Whoops. We're also going to set the table views delegate and the data source. And this was the implementation for the table I was talking about. Instead of conforming up here, because this class is getting kind of big, ignore the errors. It's just yelling that we haven't conformed yet. Go ahead and create an extension similar to what we did down below for the search stuff on the new conversation view controller, and conform to that table view delegate and the UI table view data source in here. We'll keep your code a little more modular. The functions we want is number of rows, and we're going to return results.count, which again is 0 by default. When we initialize it, we want cell for row, and here we're going to dequeue a cell, and we registered a cell called cell at the very top here, right here. So we're going to use that cell string as the identifier, and we're going to say for index path that we get as a parameter. We're going to return the cell. We're going to set the cell's text labels text to be the element in results with the key name as follows. Actually, I lied. This results is an array, so we first want to get the nth element at that position, and then we want to pull out a name, like so. And we also want something to happen when we select a user. In this case, we want to start a conversation with them. So we're going to say did select row at index path, and we want to just, for now, deselect that row at the index path with an animation. And we're going to start conversation. So let's hit Command R to see if this whole thing works. I anticipate something's probably broken that I forgot to do. So let's figure it out together. So we're logged into my account here, my Facebook account, so I can go ahead and click on this. And let's say I type in J and I press the search button. We'll see the spins here. It's still spinning here. That's not good. We should see Joe here, and the spinner should definitely go away. So let's see what we messed up. So the spinner is pretty easy. The spinner I just forgot to call dismiss on. So the spinner we show once the search button is clicked, and then we come into here. And so one thing that I see, which is a problem off the bat, is we never set this to true. So once the data has been fetched, we should say self.this is true. And we should also dismiss the spinner. And so the reason actually wasn't working is because in this function we guard and we make sure this is true. So once this function was being called, it wasn't proceeding here. And in this function, we're going to say self.spinner.dismiss. And I think that's probably the only issue. So let's hit Command R again and cross our fingers that it works. So hit this, let's type in J, hit this, we see the spinner, and we are not seeing our table here. And the reason we're not seeing our table here, I believe, is because we never set a frame for the table or the label. We just add it as a subview. So we're going to set the frame in view did layout subviews, call super on it, and say the table views frame is view.bounds, which is the entirety of the screen. Keep in mind it's hidden by default, so you still won't see it until it's unhidden. And for the no results label, we're going to give this a frame, CGRect, and we're going to have an XY width and height. So what I like to do is make the height somewhere along the lines of 100, make the width half the width of the screen, like so, make the X a quarter of the width of the screen, like that, and the Y, let's actually make this 200, and the Y will be view the height minus the height of this thing, which is 200 over 2. And actually, one more thing I forgot to do is once the user hits the search button, we want to get rid of the keyboard. So we can simply say search bar resign first responder, and this will get rid of the keyboard on the inbound search bar parameter. So third time's a charm. Hit Command R to build and run. Hit this to start a new conversation. Let's type in J and let's hit the search button here. And we get Joe in here. Look at that. So we get Joe Smith in here. So what's going on under the hood is we're fetching from Firebase after we hit the search button. If we don't have the results here already, once we get it, we come into here and we filter out the users that have J as a prefix of their name. And then finally, we update the UI based on if there's anything in the results. So you'll notice that right now we just show the user's name. It'd be really nice to show their avatar, which we will in fact be doing. And we'll make this a little nicer. I'm going to wrap up part 10 right here since this video has gotten much longer than I anticipated. And I feel like I say that for every part. But maybe we'll have the next video where we just dedicate to designing our custom cells and our making the UI look much nicer. So that's a wrap. If you haven't smashed that like button down below already, please make sure to do so for the YouTube algorithm. Helps me make continuous new videos for all of you. If you're new to the channel, please do subscribe. Helps me out a lot. Comment down below if you have any errors, questions, comments, concerns. I try to reply to every comment within a few days. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next part.